everyone, Jill Thomas here. In this week's Monday Minute episode, we're going to talk about contracts and inspections, and more specifically, the ASIS contract. Buyers and sellers tend to get a little nervous when it comes to those inspections, so I'm going to fill you in a little bit on some things to help with those inspection jitters. Whether a property looks like a model home or it's an older property, something's always going to come up on the inspection report. And remember, that's the job of the inspector, to find what's wrong. But how can we avoid those inspection jitters? Ultimately, it really has to do with understanding the process and these contracts. In the state of Florida, we have two main contracts that we use, and the biggest difference between the two has to deal with inspections. So today we're just going to talk about the ASIS contract. And part two of this series, we're going to talk about the other contract that we use. It's called the standard contract. The as-is contract says that a buyer can have any inspections they want during the inspection period. By default, the contract says that the inspection period is 15 days, but sometimes that's negotiated down for less time. During this inspection period, the buyer can be released from the contract for any reason and get their deposit money back. The buyer does not have to provide a copy of the inspection report to the seller or even give a reason. And then the seller is not contractually obligated to make any repairs when we use this as-is contract. Now, this is a pretty tight and concise explanation, but here are a few more tidbits that both help a buyer and seller to really understand the process and they're not thrown off guard. The first one is a buyer can always write specific repairs in a contract. Let's suppose there's a lot of holes in the walls from pictures and wall art. They can negotiate that up front in either contract that the seller will fix that. Number two, it isn't uncommon for a buyer to ask a seller for repairs with an as-is contract. Maybe there was something unexpected that came up. The buyer can always request a repair or a credit and then commit to moving forward with the purchase. You know, when I bought my house, the roof was just a few years old, and so when I negotiated that contract, it was under the idea that it was a newer roof. But after the inspections, we realized that there was a small leak, and so the seller was very willing to make that repair, and then we moved forward with the contract. But sellers beware, even though a contract says as is, don't be surprised if the buyer still asks for something. Number three, in lieu of a seller making an actual repair, often a seller will give a buyer a credit at closing, and then the buyer can make that repair later on after they own the home. Number four, did you know that a seller is supposed to disclose anything that materially affects the value of a home? This is anything about the home that doesn't work like it should. So with this in mind, suppose there's an as-is contract on a property and a buyer provides a copy of the inspection report to the seller with a request for some repairs. Again, the seller doesn't have to make those repairs and they can refuse to do that. But if the buyer gets out of the contract, now they have to disclose these newly discovered defects on the property. And so do I as an agent, as a real estate agent. If I know something about a property, I can't hide it from the buyers. I have to disclose it. Number five, if the seller has a preference of either contract, the property can be marketed up front as wanting only the as-is contract or the standard contract, which I'll talk about in the second part of this. Often when I sit with sellers before listing a property, I'll explain to them the differences between these two contracts and ask them if they have a preference or if they would rather leave it up to the buyer and just see what kind of offers they get. Number six, currently, the as-is contract is by far the most used contract in our area. So please do not think that if a home or a condo is being marketed as is, it's a red flag or there's something wrong with the property that you need to be cautious of. I think it's just more of a convenience for everybody that we've used the as-is contract so much. And in the past 4 or 5 years, I think I've used the standard contract just a couple of times. So the as-is contract is very, very common in our area. So I think you can clearly see that there are pros and cons to this as-is contract for both buyers and sellers. For a buyer, it's great because they like that idea of not being super locked into the contract yet because they are nervous about those inspections. They get, this free peek, well, not free because they have to pay for the inspection, but they get this insight into the property a little bit more before committing to purchase it. But at the same time, the seller does not have to make any repairs. For a seller, It's nice because they don't have to make repairs, but then again, that buyer can walk for any reason. So a seller really doesn't have all that peace of mind until we get through that inspection period, which is about 10 to 15 days. If you have any other questions about this ASIS contract or anything else that has to do with buying and selling in the Sarasota-Manatee County area, feel free to give me a call or text me. I would love to help you out and help you to understand the entire process as best as you can. Jill Thomas with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services.